Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you now joining this program. Today, it's the law and you once again. I am your host, Attorney Shellon Washington. And today, I bring you a special edition of the law and you. For those of you who might have read the caption, today we're talking about if you try a divorce but you're unable to find your spouse. We're going to discuss ways in which you'll be able to proceed with that divorce once your spouse is still alive. You know that they're alive, but you just can't find them. That's what we're going to be discussing today. I hope those of you who are joining me are having a great weekend because you're in for a treat this afternoon. And if you have any questions, as usual, you can ask your questions. As just note that this is for educational purposes only, and it's not intended to provide you with legal consultation. If you need to be guided any further based on what we're going to be discussing, feel free to reach out to my office. Feel free to call the number. I usually put the number before or and after the show, so you're going to see my phone number at the end of this session today. You can call at any time if you need guidance. But today we're going to be discussing how to find or how to deal with a situation where you've gotten into a marriage with someone and then the person and you're no longer on terms. And we know that there are different types of marital arrangements that people get into. So in this case, you might have gotten married to a woman or a man, and then eventually the both of you went your separate ways. But after time, you cannot find a person. You don't know where they moved to, where they're gone. You don't have an address. You don't have a phone number. You don't have any way to contact the person. Well, we've got you covered here today because I'm going to be explaining to you how do you deal with a situation where you are unable to find your spouse and you would like a divorce. I think the first thing you'll have to do is make sure the person is still alive, obviously. As long as the person is still alive, there's a very easy way for you to go about getting the person served or dealing with being unable to do personal service. As you know, in the state of New York, you're required to do personal service. Also in New Jersey, you're required to do personal service if you're trying to divorce your husband or your wife. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Miss Saul. Good afternoon to everyone joining me. Those of you now joining, good afternoon and welcome to today's program, The Law and You. Today, like I said before, we're discussing how do you serve your spouse if you are married to them, but you don't know where to find them. They've disappeared. You don't have a phone number. You don't have an address, but you know that they're still alive because they probably have an active Facebook account or some other sort of social media account. Now, let's talk about that because I see that very often in my practice. And a lot of people come and they say, I've gone to so many attorneys and no one was able to help me. I've had a woman came to me and she said she went to those attorneys in Manhattan and they told her they couldn't do anything for her because they couldn't find her husband. And that's not true. If your spouse just deliberately move away from there where you live or from the state where you live or even the country, they just move and you don't know where they're gone, but you know the last known address because they were living with you. The two of you were in the same household. You were sharing expenses or at some point, or even if you never actually lived together, but you know where your spouse was living, that makes your task a little bit easier in terms of getting over this hurdle. The first thing you do is obviously, I would always advise people not to try to do this on your own because a lot of people have tried to do it and it's very technical. And I think only a few attorneys understand this process. And I think I'm one of the few who knows how to get you your divorce if your spouse, you don't have an address, you don't have a job, you don't know where your spouse is living or working. I have the solution for you. Now, the first thing, like I said, ensure that you consult with an attorney. Or you can call my office and discuss it and say, well, I need to divorce my spouse. We've been married for 15 years. And out of the 15 years, we've only been living together for 2. And for the rest of the time, I do not know where this person is. They've just vanished off the grid. I know that they're still alive because they have an active Facebook account or because you and them have children together and the children communicate from time to time. But you might not want to get your children involved in that. And your children might not want to participate between, any dispute or any divorce between you and your spouse. So this is how you go about it. The first thing you do, consult After you consult, the attorney is going to tell you you need to do substituted service. It is called substituted service. How do you do substituted service, you might be asking? Well, substituted service is not like under the CPLR, because we're dealing with the domestic relations law. And based on the domestic relations law, you're required to do personal service in divorce. If you can't do personal service, then you have to go and ask the court's permission to do substituted service. Substituted service is a method used other than handing the divorce complaint in your spouse's hand, either at their last known residence or their known residence or their place of employment. In this event, you will need a motion. So the attorney is going to draft the motion, prepare the motion, and the motion, the facts has to be specifically pleaded. If it's not pleaded in a particular way, you're not going to get through. So if you go to some attorney and they say, well, I really don't know how to do this, I've never done it before, do not waste your time. You'll be wasting time and money. Go to an attorney who knows how to do it, who has done it in the past and has successfully gotten substituted service for their client. You'll find most attorneys, once you tell them you don't have an address for your spouse, they'll say, well, we can't help you. But the standard is the last known address. As long as you have the last known address for your spouse, you will be fine. So when the attorney drafts the motion for the substituted service, there are different methods of substituted service. One, in New York, permits you to serve by Facebook. Two, it permits you to serve by newspaper, or three, you can do text messages or email. But obviously, you'll have to make sure that the email or the phone number that you're going to use to serve are both valid. But one of the most popular ways of substituted service, for those of you who don't know, is the newspapers. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people probably got divorced and they didn't know because they don't regularly read the newspapers. The newspapers is a popular way to advertise legal proceedings against someone without they even knowing. And a lot of people don't even read the newspapers. Or somebody, a friend or a family or a relative might check the newspapers and notice and might call you and say, hey, I saw that you're divorcing in the newspapers. But very often people are unaware. Good afternoon to those of you now joining me. Again, welcome to the program. Today's edition, The Law and You. And we're discussing how to get a divorce if your spouse whereabouts is unknown to you. You don't know where your spouse is. You've searched everywhere. You've called up everywhere. You don't know if they moved to a different state. You don't know where they are, but you know where they were last living, where you last visited them or last spoke with them. You know that location. Then I said earlier, you're going to go by motion for substituted service. The substituted service motion, it makes your life a little bit easy, because by doing such, you don't have to search, look high and low, do everything within your power, try to find the person. You don't have to do half of that. But it's just the motion part is technical, like I said. And I would not encourage, every and anybody to go and attempt the motion, even on a pro se, because you might not know what specific facts the judge is looking for you to plea in that motion. So therefore, it's incumbent on you to seek the assistance of an attorney if you need substituted service, because you can't find the spouse. The spouse disappeared. And just so you people know, a lot of people running around and the spouse are separated, and they're running around not knowing, in the state of New York and New Jersey, when you're ready to retire, you see that same pension that you're holding, your pension, your 401k. If you, at the time you got that job, reported on your employment documents that you are married, guess what? When the time comes for your retirement, there's certain paperwork you have to fill out, and your spouse's name is also on those documents requiring the signature. If you wanna borrow against your pension, if you want to borrow against your 401k, all these things requires the signature of your spouse. And I'm not sure how some of you guys who are running around separated for decades, how do you suppose you're going to be retiring when your spouse's name are on those documents and you're going to need a signature from the spouse? You don't even know where the spouse is. I've had this happen so many times. And there's an instance where a party divorced pro se. They went and did a pro se divorce from the wife. The wife signed the paper, granted them the divorce. But on the judgment itself, it didn't make provisions as to how the pension is going to be distributed. So when they submit the divorce papers to the pension administrator, obviously the next question for the pension administrator is going to be, okay, we have to give a part of this pension to your spouse, so you need to give us a qualified domestic relations order. And at that point, you would not have gotten that because you did the divorce pro se. You don't even know what is a qualified domestic relations order. And then you're stranded because you are lost as to what you're supposed to do. What are your next steps? How do you start getting your pension to the exclusion of your spouse? This is why it's super important not to even attempt to do a pro se divorce without first consulting with an attorney, because you could be stuck in the end. Because once you get that divorce, there's no issue of equitable distribution or any of that stuff anymore. So now you're stuck in trying to figure out, okay, how do I get my pension without the pension administrator asking me for either a divorce judgment showing that my spouse is not entitled to my pension or a qualified domestic relations order? And a lot of times people don't know how to resolve that issue. And I've had it happen to people, and they've run to at least 2-3 attorneys, and the attorneys didn't even know themselves how to handle the situation. Fortunately, the clients ended up to me, and I was able to solve those problems for them. But I'm telling you this so you will avoid those pitfalls of getting a pro se divorce, not dealing with your pension, not dealing with your 401k, not dealing with any of your retirement accounts. And you just leave it hanging in limbo. And then when you're finally ready and you say, okay, I'm going to retire, I'm going to go travel, see the world, you realize that you cannot get your money because the pension administrator is going to ask you, could you present us with a divorce judgment or with a qualified domestic relations order showing that you are the only person, to the exclusion of this wife that or husband that you just divorced, to the exclusion of that person, and that we are going to be making the payments solely to you. And that's somewhere where a lot of people get stuck. So today I want to make sure that you understand and you don't get yourself caught up in a similar situation where you're stuck and you don't know what next. What am I going to do? How am I going to overcome this hurdle? How am I going to get over this? How am I going to get past this impasse? Then you have to spend more money to see an attorney to get a qualified domestic relations order, or advise the pension administrator of what they needed to do in terms of start issuing your check, your payments directly to you. So avoid that pitfall. If you're getting divorced, let's go back to the issue of getting divorced, not finding a spouse. The first option is the newspapers. Like I said, a lot of people do not read that newspapers. So chances are, even if you advertise in the papers, your spouse is not going to even know that you're divorcing them. And they're unlikely to read that notice, but that's the method the court favors most often. And there's a cost. You pay the newspapers and they advertise it for 3 consecutive weeks. And once that is done, they give you an affidavit of publication, of which is filed with the court. And then the attorney does the other steps to perfect the divorce judgment being granted. Apart from the newspapers, again, like I said, you have the Facebook, that's the social media account. And now these days we have more social media accounts. So in addition to Facebook, they usually serve it via Messenger on the party. Or you could use a simple thing like the text message, where the process server could send a text message to your spouse, telling your spouse, hey, you're being divorced. Here's a copy of the divorce papers. And that explains everything to your spouse. The process server does that either on Facebook or via text messages, or via any other method of social media, which your spouse would have access to and might very well be checking those messages. Other than the Facebook or any form of social media, text messages, or publication, there's no other substituted, because even if you serve notice by letter, that's not considered complete service for the purposes of a divorce judgment. So you must go through the court to get the court's approval to be able to serve this document on your spouse. And I want you guys to pay attention to this. Share this information with your friends, your family, whoever you might know. Somebody might be like in this situation right now. So in order to get the word out, you have to share the live, share the video, let your friends, family know that, if they're trying to get divorced and they said, well, the man moved out or the woman moved out 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I don't know where he or she is. Tell them we have got them covered. There is a method, there is a way to serve that person. Or even if there's another way, which I need to mention, because I know a lot of people who watch this show, they might have the husband or the wife might be in a foreign country, or they might have left the wife or the husband in their country and came here, and then eventually they met somebody else and they want to get remarried, but because they can't go back home, they might have overstayed themselves in this country. So now you can't leave. So now you have an immigration issue and you also have a divorce issue. So now you need to divorce and then you need to marry your new spouse so that you can get your green card and then you could start back traveling. So if that's the problem and that's the hurdle that you're facing, what you do in that situation, you ask for substituted service by mailing, because the spouse is now in a foreign country. And you probably know where in the foreign country the spouse is located. Like I said, as long as you have the last known address, or even you could be creative and tell the court, well, the spouse is not here. The spouse is in a foreign country, but you don't have an exact address. And you could tell the court you need to mail it to the last known address. You need an order permitting you to mail it to the last known address in the foreign country, and also to publish it by newspapers in that foreign country. So you'll be doing a two-step procedure in the foreign country, publishing it in the foreign country's newspapers, and then you ask the foreign newspapers to prepare an affidavit of publication, which will be notarized at the embassy in that country, and then they'll send it back here, because it would not serve any purpose unless they can have that affidavit notarized in the embassy, so that it would have some sort of validity in the courts here in the United States, or whichever state you're in this case, New York or New Jersey. So you can be creative and ask for other methods, because as long as it's newspapers publication, and it has to be a newspaper that the court will authorize. Obviously, if it's in a foreign country, the court will have to authorize whatever popular newspaper you have in that foreign country. And hopefully somebody will read it and tell your spouse, like, hey, I saw your name in the newspapers. Your spouse is asking to be divorced from you. Or a lot of times people just ignore those things. I wouldn't encourage anyone listening to this program to see a legal notice in the papers regarding yourself and to ignore it. In this country, you should never ignore any legal notice. I've seen so many people done that. Do not ignore legal notices. Anytime you get served in the mail, unless you know what you're doing, of course, unless at some point you could go back and you could vacate those orders. Like, there's ways to vacate default orders, default judgments at any time if you weren't properly served, or if you have a reasonable excuse for your delay. For instance, a lot of times people are served with legal documents when they're out of the country. That would be a justification for you not responding in time, and then you could go back at some time in the future and have those judgments, orders vacated, and then restart the process, as long as you have a reasonable excuse and you also have to have a good defense. So it can't be that you don't have no defense, but you want to vacate the judgment. You have to have a good defense, and you have to have a reasonable excuse. The law says reasonable mean, like, for instance, if you're sick, you out of the country, like I said before, or you're just away from home at the time the process server went to serve, on the time you took to get back home, it was way past the statutory time for you to respond. So that's a reasonable excuse for your delay, and you'll be able to overcome that hurdle. But like I said, I would not advise you or anyone listening to this program to deliberately ignore any type of lawsuit. Anybody serves you with a lawsuit, you should always respond, no matter how simple it looks. Because I'll tell you this, a lot of people don't know, like right now, that there's a law that was passed that will wipe out debts older than 2 years. You can't be sold on a debt older than 2 years. So now you're going to see creditors are rushing to the court within the first year of you defaulting on any debt. Prior to that, they took forever to go to court to try to enforce debts against people. But I'm seeing recently there's been an uptick of creditors rushing to the court to file complaints against people to get their money paid. A lot of people these days are defaulting on credit cards. We're living in some serious times right here in the United States. I even saw the other day on somebody post up. I think Mark had post making fun and saying one of his family sent to borrow from Guyana. Very soon America might be in that position because we're living in really, really serious times, and it's tough times for a lot of people. So you're seeing people are defaulting on their credit cards because a lot of people are now living off of credit cards. The job market, they say, is down in the United States. And I know the job market is also down in Guyana. So it's not just here, but I think people all over are feeling the effects of what it is that is actually happening. So you got to be careful when you see something come in the mail, respond. If you know you've been using a credit card or whatever, you borrow a loan from the bank and you haven't been paid and you see your suit, respond. If it's older than 2 years, they can't enforce it. You could get it dismissed. You could go to the court on a motion based on the statute and you could get it dismissed right away. Do not waste time and sit there and wait, because if you wait, you sleeping on your rights. You sleeping on your own ability to eliminate something that you could wipe out right away. And then there's also other methods to get rid of debt. But before you even get to those methods like bankruptcy, before you even get there, you want to take the very steps that are available to you in the beginning. If you know that Congress passed a law that forbids creditors from coming after you after 2 years to recover on a debt, why would you sit and wait for 3-4 years to pass? If the creditor tries to enforce it against you, just act right away and file your motion, go consult an attorney or call my office, whatever you choose to do, and get it taken care of ASAP. Don't sit and wait and sleep on your rights, okay? Don't sit down and wait till it's too late. We're living in some really, perilous times where a lot of Americans are facing a lot of uncertainty right now. People in Guyana, we know that they're facing tremendous uncertainty, even though the country supposedly have a lot of oil. It's an oil-rich country, but we know that it's very few on the top and a whole lot of people on the bottom. It's like a pyramid system. The top is very slim and the bottom very wide. Majority of the people are in the bottom portion. In Guyana, that's how it operates. You have the president and his friends and then his business partners who are doing illegal activities, and they're all the way on the top. And then on the bottom, then you have just this big, large pool of people who are struggling every day and they cannot afford basic necessities for themselves. So like I said, guys, the effects is being felt all around, and people are complaining and on every single angle. So be watchful of your credit. You have to protect your credit. You have to protect yourself. So do not sit and sleep on your rights for any creditor to go up against you and enforce any credit against you. You can stop it. You could put things in place to make sure you respond to any notices you receive in the mail. And, any type of notices you receive in the mail, you should never sit down. I've seen this too many times. People receive legal notices and they just throw it around, or some people don't even check notices. I can't tell you how many times I've filed lawsuits against people who never even check their mail, or they never opened it. They just throw it aside. And then when they get a motion for a default judgment against them, that's when they get up. That's when they run to an attorney. That's when things start getting serious for them, because then they realize like, hey, I have this motion against me. I have to respond. Like, I can't do anything at this point unless I respond to this motion. And then at that point, it might very well be too late to respond. Because then, like I said earlier, you have to have a reasonable excuse for your delay, right? Why did you wait so long? You got to have an excuse, and you have to have a very good defense to the claims against you. So on a claim for credit card debt or some loan that you took, what you think could possibly be your excuse? If you're unemployed, even that the government is not taking seriously. The courts are not taking you seriously if you say, oh, you are unemployed. That's not really an excuse. The easiest excuse on these loans and debts is bankruptcy. That's the easiest one, because there's not many defenses to repaying a debt to the government in this country. It's not very many excuses. They want their money back from you. But if you go bankrupt, they can't get it. But there's certain debts that cannot be wiped off through bankruptcy, and that's something you need to also bear in mind. There's some debts like student loan, taxes, child support, those things you cannot ever wipe off, period. So bear those things in mind each time you think about allowing a notice to come in the mail and not open those notices to check and see what it is. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to those of you who have just joined or now joining. Good afternoon to everyone. And again, today's program is the law and you, and I've been discussing mainly this afternoon. If you're trying to divorce your spouse, I've been discussing the way in which you will go about doing that. The other stuff we've discussed, they're just bonus issues, which I know is affecting a lot of people, because we've been seeing that a lot, where people are getting sued for credit card debts. They're not paying back those debts, not intentionally. A lot of times those actions is just unavoidable. There's a lot of unemployed people. There's a lot of people laid off or they can't find work. And then there's the other problem that is happening in the state of New York. There's an influx of migrants. I mean, migrants, it's always good to have migrants, but with the influx of all those migrants, now you are competing for work with them because the government is giving them work permit. And even if they don't have a work permit, as you know, New York is what is called a sanctuary state. Also New Jersey. So if you're living in the tri-state area, they're all sanctuary states. And sanctuary states just mean that somebody could come from anywhere, undocumented. They could come on a visitor visa. They could come without inspection or whatever it is, come to this country, and then they can approach an employer. And the law says, the state law says, the employer can employ them. They can't reject, they don't have to reject them. The employer can employ that person. But the fact of the matter is, now you're going to have that person competing against you for work. And then the labor value is going to fall, which is most likely to happen. Once labor value falls, then labor becomes cheaper and it becomes easier to find employees. And I know recently in New York, a lot of people have been refusing to work. A lot of people been staying home since after COVID. So now it's going to make it easier. If those people who are now here could learn English and they're speaking it, it'll make it easier for those employers to take them on, and then you'll be competing. So I think some of these factors are affecting people with their credit cards, and then they can't pay their debts. So we are living in some serious times, people. But you know what? We are going to stay focused. And we'll get through these times, whatever is happening in the state of New York or around us. You know, people are capable of getting through. So let me get back finally to recap what we've discussed this afternoon. We've discussed whether or not if you're trying to divorce your spouse, but you don't know where that spouse is. As long as you know that the spouse is alive, it's easy to find that person. To serve the complaint or the summons and the complaint on that person by way of substituted service. And you have to be the one to know whether or not the person have a social media account, because that's one of the ways. Publication is one of the ways. Any form of text message is also another way of substituted service. And like I said, guys, don't just rush to any divorce attorney, because not many of them knows how to make this motion for substituted service. So you have to be careful with that. All right. So if you're looking for a divorce, you live in New York and you're looking for a divorce, but you don't know where the spouse is, I've already told you the method which you need to use to get service on that person. Again, guys, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. It was my pleasure joining you for this short edition, half an hour, the law and you. If there's any specific issue you would like to hear about, guys, just send me a text message. I'm sorry, not a text message, but a message via Messenger. You could do that I'm located on Facebook also via my own name. You could find me on Facebook. just send me a message and let me know if there's an issue you would like for us to discuss. Next week, I will have Mark joining me, and we'll be discussing some other immigration issues, which I know people like to hear about immigration issues. So we'll be discussing that next week. So join me next week at 4 p.m. and we will be discussing this for half an hour. Thank you so much, guys, and do enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I will see you again next Saturday at 4 p.m. It was my pleasure being here this afternoon. Thank you so much, guys. So, this is attorney Shellon Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm, located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're specialized in medical malpractice, personal injuries, matrimonial law, and landlord and tenant. If you're in need of legal representation, please give us a call today. The number to call is 718-877-3100. Consultation is free at no cost to you. So call us today to see if we can be of any assistance to your legal needs. Again, the phone number to call us is 718-877-3100.